Okay, gas exchange in plants and in insects and in fish. So the main thing that you need to remember about gas exchange is it's by diffusion. And if it's by diffusion at the cellular level, then you need a large surface area, you need a steep concentration gradient, and you need a short diffusion pathway. So, in a leaf, you have the upper epidermis, you have then the layer of palisade cells which are doing the photosynthesis. That means they need to access lots of carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide can only enter through the holes in the lower epidermis, which are called the stoma or stomata. They are opened and closed by the guard cells. So carbon dioxide diffuses in down its concentration gradient through the air spaces. You notice that the carbon dioxide is only having to diffuse through a couple of cells before it reaches the palisade layer. So these cells get a good level of carbon dioxide because of the thinness of the leaf. So it's a very, very short diffusion pathway from the stoma in the lower epidermis to the palisade cells. There are many palisade cells and they are all layered end to end to make a biggest surface area as possible, and to maintain the concentration gradient, those cells are constantly using up the carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, which helps to maintain the concentration gradient for carbon dioxide in on a sunny day when the plant is photosynthesizing lots. Similarly, in insects, we also have a way of opening and closing called the spiracles to allow gas exchange to happen. So just as the stoma can be opened and closed by the guard cells, the spiracles can also be open and closed. And this is a feature that you find in terrestrial plants and terrestrial insects because they need to limit water loss. Because the moment that those are open, then water can move out by osmosis down a water potential gradient because there tends to be more water vapour inside the leaf or the insect than in the outside atmosphere. So that's one way that the insect and the plant can limit their water loss. When the insect needs to do gas exchange, so it needs oxygen because its muscle cells are respiring aerobically, so they're using up oxygen, so the oxygen needs to diffuse as quickly as possible, so we have a very short diffusion pathway, so that will limit the size of the insect. So each cell is directly access to a tracheole. The tracheoles then move together and join to form a tracheae, and then the tracheae goes straight out to the spiracle, which is an opening in the bottom of the insect. So there's lots and lots of openings, lots and lots of tracheae, lots and lots of tracheoles, and that helps to increase the surface area for the transport of gases because there's many, many tracheoles accessing all the different cells. So each cell is very, very close to the ending, a tracheole, so that's a big surface area. Maintains the concentration gradient by having lots and lots of aerobic respiration using up the oxygen, so that means there's always more oxygen outside here than there is inside here, and it's very short, so that limits the maximum size of your insect because if it's too far then the diffusion will not be able to deliver enough oxygen in the time that is needed by these cells in order to respire. So that's how we work in an insect. You can also talk about water in these tracheoles. So in these ends of these tracheoles you can sometimes get water. If the insect starts doing anaerobic respiration, what will happen is that will create lactic acid, that will decrease the water potential of these cells. So if the water potential of those cells is really low, that will cause water to leave the tracheoles by osmosis, and that will increase then the volume open for the diffusion of the gas. So again, increasing the surface area for gas exchange because more gas can get in a bigger volume, so over a bigger space for more diffusion, more quickly. So that's insects. If we now look at fish, fish and insects are similar in that they can both ventilate. What we mean by that is that they can contract and move their bodies or their abdomens to change the volume, and that changes the pressure. So when a fish wants to draw water in, it lowers its jaw, that makes the volume in the buccal cavity in the mouth bigger, that decreases the pressure, so water moves in down a pressure gradient. Then it opens the back of its gills, the operculum, and that again changes the volume size. They can close their mouth, lift up the bottom of their jaw, and that makes the volume in here really small, and so the pressure really, really high, and outside the pressure is lower, so again water then will move out of the fish down a pressure gradient. So they make the pressure really low inside to get the water in, and then really high inside to get the water out, and it's all moving in one direction. That's different to in here, because in here what happens is the insect contracts its body, that decreases the volume, increases the pressure, and the air moves out. It can then change its muscles, relax, and that will increase the volume, and that will decrease the pressure, and air will then move in. So it can ventilate, but in this case, the air is always moving in and out of the same spot, the spiracles, so it's backwards and forwards, and that's because they use gas, and moving gas backwards and forwards is relatively easy, but fish use water, and they use the oxygen dissolved in the water. Remember, they're not breaking down water molecules to release oxygen. What they're doing is water molecules, so this is my water molecule, in a body of water, you have oxygen dissolved in that. And so it's the oxygen that's dissolved in the water. So if you affect the amount of oxygen dissolved in water, for example, if you heat up that body of water, you actually reduce the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water, and that makes it really difficult for those fish. So once the water is in and over the gills, then we have something called the countercurrent mechanism. And in that, all it means is you have the blood flowing in one direction and the water flowing in the opposite direction, so that there is a concentration gradient of oxygen from the water into the blood across the whole of that lamella. So to increase the surface area in fish, we have lots and lots of filaments. So each one of these is a separate filament. You have lots and lots of lamellae on each of those filaments, which are these tiny things. Each of those filaments holds a separate capillary bed. That means that the water comes very, very close to the blood, so that's a really short diffusion pathway, and the concentration gradient is kept steep because of the countercurrent flow. So if we have the blood coming in is a really low concentration, then we make sure that that matches the water that's going out, because that will also have a low concentration of oxygen, but it will still be higher than in the blood, and therefore oxygen will diffuse from the water into the blood all the way along the lamellae. So the fresh water that's just come in, that's got the highest concentration of oxygen, will come to the blood that's got the highest concentration of oxygen as well, but there's still more oxygen in the water than in the blood, and therefore you'll get diffusion of oxygen across the whole of this lamellae, which is very efficient and means you get as much oxygen out of that water as possible.